Greetings, everyone. This is Alex with my Cryptocast, and as always, we are lucky to have Mr. Dominick Romano here. Today, we're actually going to discuss the first ever AI World Fair that took place last week in Decentraland. Decentraland, for anybody that's unaware of that metaverse, it's a blockchain-based metaverse that allows people to own real estate, own the wearables they create. The event took place in what's called the Innovation City District, which actually features the headquarters for the world famous Sophia the Robot, who was the first robot citizen in Saudi Arabia. The event featured speakers such as NVIDIA and SingularityNET, and just a lot of interesting topics during the event that I thought related to a lot of things you and I talk about. Things such as, how do we deploy AI responsibly in virtual worlds?
Yeah, and Dr. Ben and the team over at SingularityNET have really been leading the way in pushing blockchain technologies to their limit, right? So the work that they do at SingularityNET is quite incredible, and they were actually a really big piece of the AI for Good UN Global Summit this year. They had an incredible presence there, and they actually sponsored the farewell reception where, they kind of gave us all these updates on the many different initiatives that they have going on right now. And they do a lot for the innovation space where they make, they've built several multi-billion-dollar funds for investing in emerging technologies. So their team there is incredible. I have nothing but great things to say about them. And I look forward to kind of jumping into this subject. There's so much going on right now in not only the technology space overall, but between blockchain, between AI, between the policy discussions that are taking place. Right now we have the European Union is drafting the first ever AI treaty, which is a very historic moment. And then at the same time, we were told that a executive order is imminent on the past Monday. By the time this episode posts, this will be the past Monday we just had. We're expecting an executive order to be posted on artificial intelligence being sold to the public sector. So there's a whole lot going on right now, and I look really forward to jumping into it with you today.
Yeah, so shameless shout out to SingularityNet and all the wonderful things they've been doing for years now. I've been following their work. But I'm glad they haven't been discouraged with the metaverse. I know statistically more users are using more non-blockchain based metaverses, such as, the Roblox and the Fortnites of the world. But again, the idea of a user-owned internet, these user-owned blockchain-based metaverses such as the Sandbox or Decentraland, where users actually can create, own, and resell the items on secondary marketplaces. That's such a paradigm shift from these closed ecosystems that we're so used to in Web 2, where you buy something on the Apple Store and it's locked to that specific ecosystem. With Web 3 and blockchain, we're migrating to this user-owned world where I could actually physically own products. I could physically own the real estate in these metaverses such as Decentraland. I can build my business on it. I can rent my real estate to other businesses. I could resell it when I'm done with it. But again, what is the policy? What is the global framework that's going to regulate the commerce in these virtual spaces? And what does the UN have to say about all this?
Well, the UN actually has, so in the UN, you have multiple different agencies, right? And one of those agencies is the International Telecommunication Union, right? And at the ITU, they have a initiative for the metaverse, which is actually a very popular new initiative that people have been contributing to help write standards for the metaverse, right? So obviously it's still being worked on. And as time goes on, we're going to start seeing a lot more focus on that. And a lot of what we're seeing the focus on, like when I look at the members who are contributing actively to that initiative right now, which it's really just a focus group on metaverse, right? Now, when you look at who contributes the most to the research on this focus group, you're looking at a lot of the travel and travel and commerce agencies within different countries around the world. So that kind of shows that countries are looking at ways that they can use the metaverse to digitally create the cultural experience of the tourism experience, right? So, giving people the opportunity to experience the culture of a country from a, augmented or virtual reality experience in a metaverse, which it's going to unlock a whole new form of tourism, which is going to be your metaverse tourism, right? And that's kind of an exciting thing. I think it's really going to help us connect people to cultures in new and creative ways. Then there's also the other portion, which I'm more focused on for the work that I do, and that's using metaverse like environments and 3D environments to then develop training sets that can be used in AI models, right? So rather than waiting for a dangerous event to occur or a catastrophic event to occur, we can utilize digital twins and the metaverse to simulate those catastrophic events before they actually create the catastrophic damage to the economies around the world that they could, right? Like an earthquake creates catastrophic damage to a nation's economy. A tsunami creates catastrophic damage. A hurricane creates catastrophic economic damage. So before these events actually unfold, we can actually simulate what those events would look like and the what the actual potential outcomes of these events would be, so that we can be more prepared to respond to them, right? So look, in the case of an earthquake, when an earthquake happens, like let's take, for example, Turkey, right? They experienced a historic earthquake that hit not only Turkey, but also Syria earlier this year. And when that happened, if you're standing as a first responder in the middle of just piles of rubble of what was once a city, you don't even really know where you are. You have no basis of orienting yourself based off of like what the infrastructure used to be. So that's where having a metaverse and digital twins really can come in handy, because what was once there can be visualized, and then that will help provide a better understanding of, where there are densely populated residential houses, or, where there's businesses, so that the efforts can be targeted toward getting to potential survivors or potential victims of such a catastrophic event. So that, those are the things that I'm really excited to see start kind of rolling out from some of this work.
That's fascinating too, because I wonder about the implications for property rights through leveraging these digital twins. I recall about maybe it was half a decade ago, the UN had a project with Haiti where they were trying to, tokenize and place real estate deeds on the blockchain. Because, yeah, when your country is war torn or had, devastation similar to what you just mentioned, there's no way of properly enforcing property rights. But yeah, I love your examples for the AI modeling of catastrophes. I imagine also you could hate to say simulate economic war games as well using artificial intelligence. Like, maybe we could simulate what if a country sold all of the bonds they held a specific country and what kind of implications that would have for the global economy. Yeah, and also just, regarding that foreign tourism, I believe it's in Decentraland that Barbados has their embassy. Maybe it's inconvenient for me to go to Barbados, but I can plug in a virtual headset or sign into my desktop and get that virtual experience of a foreign location that I wouldn't normally be able to get every day. And I think that'll help to build in a level of inclusivity where people that might not have the capital or the resources to visit these far off places, they'll be able to do it from the convenience of their mobile phone or computer.
Very interesting. So in your opinion, what do you think is the best use case for the combination of blockchain and the metaverse today that you've seen?
Yeah, I think the majority of the use cases have been very economic focused. Even, the same could be said for Bitcoin, for example. I know Jason Lowery wrote that Bitcoin Space War book,
Softwar.
Softwar. Yeah, basically his concern was that everybody is so focused on the financial application of the technology of Bitcoin and less focused on the power of proof of work and how it can allow nations to secure, any valuable bits of information by imposing physical constraints on their adversaries through using Watts, which I thought was very fascinating. One idea he had in the book was that potentially proof of work could transition the world out of physical war fighting, human death tolls due to the ability of this technology to enforce laws more effectively than possibly international courts and laws. Because when a system breaks down, when the international order breaks down, unfortunately, war tends to follow, physical conflict. But if we were able to, put these laws into smart contracts and be able to enforce them using software, I just think that's wonderful for the world.
There is also a great use case in the supply chain logistics side of things too, right? Because when you're talking about a value store on the blockchain, you can actually store the quantities and the locations of the different goods that are making their way across a supply chain, right? And in the case of the logistics, kind of like how you had mentioned, using the example of some of the work that Jason Lowery has done and highlighted in his book Softwar, you know, there are ways using blockchain on the logistics side, especially when you start looking at how, logistics is done at the battlefield, right? There are ways with blockchain technology and, using, watts as a power indicator to drive constraints that would really actually it's really meant to kind of entice people not to go into war, right? Because just the overall cost would be too great, right? And one of the big things that Jason Lowery highlights, and I do agree with it, and I have several colleagues that are in the Department of Defense that kind of agree with this as well, is that militaries and nations really ought to start Bitcoin mining, right? Because like when you have all this computation, if that computation is not being pushed at 100%, if you have hardware that's just readily available, and if it's not being pushed to 100% because it's not at an active wartime readiness state, then the best other alternative is to turn it into revenue by mining Bitcoin, right? Because then you're essentially taking static hardware that is just kind of there for the equipment when it's time to act and it's time to mobilize. Now you're taking that and you're turning that into recurring revenue from mining, and that's a really interesting idea that could really change the way that militaries are funded in the future. Right now, I have a whole concern over the ethics of when you start sliding from, you're using blockchain technologies for supply chain logistics, like at a company like a bottling company or, a shipping company, or even like a big company like Nike, where they have just their supply chain is massive because of just how big they are, right? But when you start kind of making that jump from your private sector into your public sector, and then that starts kind of going into the the defense and the wartime stuff, I definitely have some concerns with how blockchain technology would be used in an ethical manner, and then also how blockchain meets artificial intelligence and how the two of them in combination really need to be used in a highly ethical manner. And what really brings a level of thankfulness and a level of pride for me personally is when I deal with or speak with a military leadership across the board, and they tell me that we don't want to have artificial intelligence making decisions for us. We always want to have humans in the loop because we want to maintain the ethical core of who we are. And that means so much to me to hear and to actually have leadership explaining that. And look, the details of what that ethical core looks like as it relates to advanced emerging technologies, that's stuff that it's going to take us a little bit of time to really work through, right? I mean, look back in the early to mid 1900s, right? You had this new emerging discovery, which would later become nuclear, a nuclear bomb. And there had to be a lot of different ethical debates over whether or not it should even be created, right? Now, today we're kind of in the same boat, except what's kind of different is that we don't have the level of chaos that we did in the world today that existed in the late 1930s and 40s, right? At that period, you had over 1,000 people a day who were dying just from war. Today, I mean, we're starting to see uh, a resurgence of the the small little indicators that we're kind of starting to slant toward greater conflicts, given just the instability that's starting to arise in the Middle East, the instability that's being generated by the different countries that have different viewpoints on that instability. And then obviously we have several different conflicts across several different oceans that are like at boiling points at any given moment. And so, we're starting to kind of get back into that highly chaotic point, which we saw at once before. And I'm very, I pay attention to this a lot because I'm very hopeful that cooler heads will prevail because, looking at it today, I'm worried about swarm drones, that are used as kamikazes, right? We saw this deployed in Ukraine where you had just these massive swarms of drones that were used to kamikaze boats in the Black Sea. And, obviously we need to set some ethical guidelines and some policy there really at the high end of the UN, right? So that really, and this should be stuff that comes from the UN Security Council more than anything, right? And we really need to kind of come to a global, we really need to come to a global understanding that, there's going to be certain things that are just not acceptable to do, right? With AI. And, I'm confident that we could get there because I think that everyone had, everyone would be concerned about the same things, right? So, if one person can come up with a kamikaze drone and a swarm of them, then so can another. And if one country can do it, so can another. And so we really need to do a lot to make sure that everybody's playing on the same ethical field. Because the minute that you go to war, normally ethics aren't really in that conversation outside of international law. And even then, like we're seeing in current conflicts now, there's cases where there could be violations of international law on war fighting. So, it's a very, very hairy subject. And so I look really forward to actually going this week when this episode posts. I will be in Zurich at the largest AI policy summit in Switzerland, which is huge because right now we have the European Union that is drafting the first ever treaty on artificial intelligence. And at the same time, the United States administration is about to release a executive order on artificial intelligence models being sold to the federal government. Now, the executive order is mainly targeted toward testing and evaluation. However, I have a couple of concerns, right? Now, my big concern is in the test and evaluation standards that are going to be demanded. Who is actually coming up with that, right? I mean, We do have some of the most amazing software engineers and computer scientists in the world here in America. And, our economy is a pure testament to the American innovation that takes place, right? I mean, there is no other place in the world like America where you can come and you can innovate and you can jump tax brackets and you can, create things that people can really touch and utilize. So, yeah, I'm really curious to see how all this unfolds.
You bring up just the international conflict going on right now, and yeah, I do wonder what the ICC or the International Criminal Court has to say about all of it going on every side, unfortunately. But yeah, global understanding is instrumental. I wonder how we will ever become an interplanetary species if we're too busy, bickering amongst ourselves. It's a gigantic universe out there. The observable universe is what, over, was it 13.7 billion years old? In the grand scheme of things, it just, this conflict we're having just seems so insignificant in some ways. But yeah, back to even the Softwar book by Jason Lowery. He did argue, that could be strategically important for us to hold Bitcoin as a nation. And I love how you brought up, I haven't even thought about why don't we as a country, why don't countries mine Bitcoin? The reoccurring revenue could help to reduce our debt levels. I recall a layer two solution on Bitcoin called Blockstacks was using a process called stacking to, they released a coin called Miami Coin, and it was to help generate revenue for Miami's treasury. I'm not sure how that project is still going on or if it's being leveraged, but yeah, in theory, nations could mine, they could stake, they can do things to help bring down these unsustainable debt levels that we're living through right now. Yeah, AI ethics is just so important, even going back to what I said last week about, hey, we have the technology to combine artificial intelligence with decentralized autonomous organizations. Hey, we could potentially have AI, we could give them a treasury worth billions of dollars and they can run a blockchain based company. But if, like you said, it may be very important to have a human overseeing that, because, if ethics is not built into AI, what could they potentially do with these blockchain based businesses? But oh yeah, and you mentioned, how did I forget? The supply chain is has always been one of my favorite use cases for the blockchain, for better and for worse. I do love the idea of a more transparent food supply chain. I think Walmart, it might have been 5 or 6 years ago, they were experimenting, I think it was in China, with basically you put QR codes, basically you put the food on the blockchain, customers can go to the store, scan the QR code, know exactly where in the supply chain that food has been, if it's organic. But what I really love about that too is that it reduces a lot of waste because, say nowadays, if there's some type of salmonella outbreak or something wrong with your food, you know, we basically just do a blanket ban where like, oh, all these companies need to throw out all their products. Whereas by putting food on the blockchain, you could really specifically identify and target which product is safe for consumption. And I think a more transparent dinner plate would be great for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. Back in 2018, when I was running one of the largest developers of intelligent voice applications in the world for Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant, I had the opportunity to sit through some sessions in New York City with IBM where they were kind of discussing how that that process, how the supply chain for, I think it was for bananas, could be tracked using Hyperledger Fabric.
They have
Um,
always
yep. So that's an interesting thing, and I love having these conversations with you because I do consider you to be one of the most educated in the world in blockchain. So like you always hit me with these new facts. So kind of going back to the first World Fair in the metaverse, tell me a little bit about like what's what's the big implication there? Why is it such a monumental moment in technology? And what do you think are the future implications here of such a thing?
the term Web3. I really think this new internet, artificial intelligence and blockchain, they're, two sides of the same coin. I really get AOL in the 90s vibes when I go into these virtual worlds, especially Decentraland, because it's not impressive, per computer nerd standards, but you could really see the potential of this technology 30 years from now. The fact that I can own a part of the internet and everything is interoperable, unlike, the internet today, I think that is very important, and we're witnessing a lot of Fortune 100 companies even that are releasing trademarks on how they plan to adopt this technology. And I think especially small and medium-sized businesses right now, they should really start thinking about how they're going to integrate Web3 into their current business processes. Because, I've been in the industry for over a decade now. And, unfortunately, it has been the companies with money that have been innovating in this space. And we really need to allow everyday people, everyday businesses to, advance in this space. Fidelity, they bought up some land in Decentraland because eventually, you know, firms like Fidelity want to be able to provide advice in the metaverse. And I think that I know people maybe in our generation, or especially a lot older, the boomers, no offense, Dominic and I are older than we look. But that aside, I think those are the Roblox generations. And I do think the younger audience who get their financial advice from YouTube, they're the ones spending the most time statistically in these virtual spaces. So I think traditional companies building services and products to target that market is very important to remain relevant in this industry.
It's a really interesting thing too, because it's when you think about it, it's forcing brands yet again to rethink how their brand is represented, right? Because it creates a whole new brand experience, right? It's kind of like when Amazon Alexa first came out and you could talk to the Alexa. Brands had to figure out how they can use, sonic branding to really represent the feel of their brand and the sound of their brand, so that a person can talk to a device and actually still get that, if it's a Starbucks, you're still going to get that Starbucks experience when you're ordering a coffee from your voice chat assistant, right? And likewise. So it's really interesting how the metaverse and blockchain and the whole Web3 movement is really making brands rethink about how they're represented in these emerging new economies, right? Like, and somebody who I would shout out as being one of really the forefront leader in the Web3 and blockchain space in the entertainment world is Snoop Dogg. Without a doubt, he has done some really cool stuff with first he bought the Death Row Records label, and he's been bringing that brand into the metaverse to create new experiences for fans to actually interact with the historic artists that were on that label from the time, right? So everyone from Tupac to you name it, right? And that's
Snoop
amazing.
Dogg is I consider him a true entrepreneur, just all the different business model. I learned the other day on LinkedIn, because he actually has a LinkedIn presence, that he has a kids channel where he teaches kids how to brush their teeth. He's always been at the forefront of Web3. I know a lot of the real estate so he has a mansion in the Sandbox universe where he actually filmed a metaverse music video. That's something I don't think I've seen since or often. But yeah, I know a lot of the real estate around his mansion were going for millions of dollars during the speculative frenzy.
No, it's all right. I mean, Snoop has done an amazing job really pushing the forefront of reimagining the consumer experience with content, right? And that's really cool. And it's especially cool to see from somebody like Snoop, who, he's a veteran in the entertainment space, and to see him now, be a CEO and really leading the way, where like he even did the first ever dual streamed Super Bowl halftime show where they also did the halftime show in the metaverse, which was really cool.
You and I should be doing an episode from the metaverse. We spent all day talking about it. Maybe we
Yes.
could go into spatial, which is, we refer to it more as a 2.5 metaverse, where people don't need a Web3 wallet to sign in. They could use their, Apple, Microsoft email account. I'm going to put that on our to-do list. I think we got to walk the walk.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned spatial. Something else I would mention is that, like, it's interesting how, we're kind of moving toward this metaverse experience. And then at the same time, we're seeing, a big push with Meta, big push with Apple to provide new platforms that deliver these experiences to us, right? So in the case of Apple, Apple is really working to set the standard of what spatial computing looks like, which is really the idea of computing the spaces of the metaverse. And that's a really interesting idea when you talk about delivering that content and that experience directly into a headset for consumers to be able to interact with. I think we're going to see a lot of new things.
Adoption will be more steadfast with the augmented reality vision that Apple has created with the Apple Vision Pro. I still think, not everybody wants to put on a headset where they can't see the world around them and be immersed through that fashion. Whereas Apple really, they fused the best of both worlds, where I could immerse myself completely in a virtual reality world, and probably in the future, a metaverse like Decentraland or Sandbox. But then you could also just go into the augmented reality world where I could go about my everyday life, and just going back to how, you know, traditional Fortune 500 companies are really rethinking how they market their brand to this using augmented reality. You see a lot of videos online of, you look at a billboard and it's coming out at you. But yeah, I mean, the Apple Vision Pro right now does have like iPod Generation 1 vibes. I mean, it does look like a scuba, you're putting on scuba gear to your face, but again, 10, 20 years from now, I mean, you're aware they have this technology in people's contact lenses. So I mean, I could literally just put a contact lens in and surf the internet. But
And by
yeah,
the way, I
really,
can't thank you enough for letting me borrow your Quest, because it's helped me get an understanding really of like where things are going with it. And that's been a really awesome thing to kind of tinker with, and especially as a developer.
business meetings on a putt-putt course using VR. But I digress. I can't wait to see the fusion of virtual reality with, what you're building with Drainpipe.
Yeah, well, I'm aiming to create a utility and a platform for, you know, anyone in our organization. And then eventually we're going to get to where, everyday people will be able to utilize a tool that will help them manage their data, help them build out knowledge graphs of everything that they have in their databases or in their repositories of different files, and then also be able to easily manipulate 3D environments. And obviously there's going to be limitations on, who can do what. So like what kind of different objects you can work with in that environment, or what kind of different things you can do in that environment. But the implications are massive. And I think that over time we're going to start seeing, like you saw this year in the time emerging tech, or invented tech for this year edition of Time Magazine. They they had mentioned NVIDIA's Neural Angela, which takes a 2D image and turns it into 3D surfaces. That kind of technology is massively important for being able to represent what is being viewed or sensed by 2D sensors as a interactive 3D environment. And I can't wait. I just saw recently, I think it was this week or last, where I saw dynamic Gaussian splatting for the first time. And what that is that's representing a 3D environment as Gaussian splats, except now we have humans in that Gaussian splat, where now you can show a human moving dynamically. And I can't wait to see what that does when you start introducing family videos, and just all the data that we amass on our family throughout the years. I think that we're going to eventually get to a point where these environments and the metaverse almost work symbiotically with human beings to keep them functioning at an optimal level, right? Because, when we have veterans that come back from war who have who suffer from PTSD, and the suicide rate is through the roof, we can pair those veterans with therapies and treatments in these environments that help them work through what they're dealing with. And that could be useful for even everyday people who might be dealing with grief and might miss somebody, and they need to see that person and be able to interact with them again. And I also think a big exciting thing is giving people the opportunity to experience history in a new way, right? So, there was a 60 Minutes episode a couple years back about how they were shooting interviews with Holocaust survivors, right? And they would bring them into the studio for like 7 days at a time, and they had hundreds of cameras around them in this dome, right? And they were asking them questions and recording it so that they can train that into an artificial intelligence model, so that for for all the time to come in the future, we'll be able to go back and communicate with Holocaust survivors and be able to ask them questions about what exactly they experienced, so that us, the people who remain, can actually never forget what that was like for those who lived it. And I think that idea is going to create a new closeness even for people with their relatives, right? So, the idea of being able to communicate with your relatives and ask them for wisdom that they had gained through their trials and tribulations of their life will really help better educate us as we move forward. And that's a really exciting thing. All of those different things are really exciting.
Several applications that are allowing users to upload data of their relatives. So when they are deceased, their future generations can view and learn from that. Which, the example you did regarding the Holocaust survivors, I mean, I imagine that's something children could go to school even and learn from. But I'm sure the whole education system will be reshaped and revamped this decade. And I can't even imagine, how it would look. I appreciate you being with us. I learn so much from you every day I spend time with you. And could you tell us what you have going on next? I know you have another exciting event that we're going to cover soon.
Oh yeah, for sure. So coming up, let's see. So coming up, we have November 3rd and 4th. We have the Global AI Policy Summit that's taking place at ETH Zurich in Zurich, Switzerland. I'm going to be heading out there. I've been pretty instrumental in inviting key people. The event is taking place at the school that Einstein went to in Zurich, and it's the I consider that to be one of the intellectual capitals of Europe, where some of the most difficult topics of our times, even times past, were debated. So, that's where Oppenheimer went to debate the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And it's where, a lot of different political subjects throughout the years have been debated hotly. So I'm really excited to be taking part in the Global AI Policy Summit at ETH Zurich. I want to say a huge shout out to the ETH Zurich Center for Law and Economics, and specifically Aisha Paioti, the director of AI policy there. They've been super welcoming. We have a tremendous panel that is, a tremendous series of panels on day one that is set. We're talking about the UN Tech Envoy. We have, policy writers for the EU AI Act, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. They're going to be there. We have people who are writing the EU's Artificial Intelligence Treaty. They're going to be there. We're going to have officials from America that are with the Equal Opportunity Commission, Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. They're going to be there. So we're really going to have a great representation of leaders from across the board coming together. We're going to have an open door session for the first day. Then the second day, we're going to be going to work, and we're going to make some progress on policy. And then, a couple weeks right after that, we have the National AI Policy Summit, here in America, where we're going to be working on composing a document where signers are going to submit to Congress for AI policy here in America. So I'm really excited about all the different things going on. And then when this episode posts the Monday before, so only a couple of days ago, well, we will have seen the details of this new artificial intelligence executive order, which I'm kind of skeptical of because I really don't know who's setting the standards just yet for whether or not an AI model is safe to be deployed. Because I just know that in the work that I do at the UN, I'm the only American there at the table. So, I'm very curious to see what unfolds here. This has been a really hot 2-week period, and there's so much going on. And then obviously, like you said, we had our first World Fair in the metaverse. So just a really exciting time. And yeah, the Toronto was amazing, right? So we had all that going on there, and now we're going to Zurich.
It's such an honor that you were the only US citizen on the floor at the UN. Shameless shout out to Crypto Valley that is actually located in Zug, Switzerland. They're home to over 1,000 different blockchain companies, and they are basically the Silicon Valley in the blockchain space. Even the Ethereum Foundation is located there. But yeah, I honestly cannot wait to hear about all the people you mentioned at the event in Switzerland, and we're going to learn more about the AI executive order very soon. So, all right, viewers, thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week with coverage in Switzerland. Peace.
Thank you.